This episode is fueled by the American Petroleum Institute. No matter your politics, no matter the debate, one thing is certain. America runs on affordable, reliable energy. America's policies must recognize that Americans benefit from making, moving, and improving the energy right here in America. Today, America's oil and natural gas industry supports nearly 11 million jobs and provides American energy to keep this nation strong. Learn how at api.org.
Well, here we are again at the Ruthless Presidential Showcase, fueled by America's oil and natural gas. You can learn more about all of that at api.org. And this day, we've got a very important guy, former governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson. Welcome to the program.
Hey, it's great to be with you. Excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, you've been doing a lot of traveling. We've been reading a lot about it. You had a pretty wild weekend last weekend. We'll get into all of that. But I think where we want to start is have people get to know you a little bit. You grew up in Arkansas politics back sort of when the Clintons were running things down there, and that has to be an interesting perspective on where things are today.
I started in Arkansas politics when we were a red dot. The Republican Party is a red dot in a blue ocean. I was told as a young lawyer that if you want to have a future, you better be a Democrat if you want to be a prosecutor or a judge. Of course, that was when Reagan was advertising or marketing his conservatism. I identified with that, limited role of government, opportunity, responsibility. So, I ditched the Republican Party, Republican, and it's been an uphill slog. I was a county chairman in Benton County, Bentonville, when Ronald Reagan got elected. And then I was a state party chairman of the Republican Party when Bill Clinton was governor and when he was running for president. So
you got to have some great Clinton stories, don't you?
Oh, everybody in Arkansas has Clinton stories, and of course, he has his library there. We get along well, but we've been constructive adversaries from the time that I was in Congress, state party chairman, and of course, then even the administration. I mean, he was president while I was in Congress.
Yeah.
And you were a House manager on the impeachment proceedings in '98. Is that right?
Oh, I was indeed. It was one of the most unusual times. Now you've gone through, 3 impeachments? And at the time that we did the articles of impeachment during the Clinton administration, is the first time it had done in 100 years. So it was unusual. And it was dramatic. And, of course, with Bill Clinton being from my home state, it was even more controversial. It was very unusual whenever I'm presenting the obstruction of justice case in the Senate, and President Clinton decides it's a good time to give his State of the Union address. And, of course, it's tradition that the members of Congress from the president's home states escorts him into the chambers. So I had to leave the Senate chambers prosecuting the president, go back and escort him into the chambers on the outside.
It's like a perp walk.
But I mean, it must have been wild. Somebody you'd known for years from the other side as party chairman and everything else, like you just said, to go back and to not only be the House manager, escort him into the. Did you guys talk much at that time?
Well, not much.
A lot of friendly commentary, I imagine.
Yeah, it was that day that he actually hired Dale Bumpers, a former U.S. Senator, as his legal counsel. And so I thought, well, at least I'll make it a little bit lighthearted. So I saw him and I said, well, I'm glad you finally got a decent lawyer to represent you. But, Bill...
Did he even crack a smile at that?
Oh, he did. And he's always, I mean, whenever my brother... Tim got elected to the Senate, and I got elected to the House at the same time. First time in the history of our country that 2 brothers got elected simultaneously. And anyway, so my mom was alive then and went to the White House, and Clinton heard that the Hutchinsons are out there, and he entertained and tried to win over my mom.
Did he really?
Oh, yeah. And so my mom was 80-something, and she's looking at his curio cabinet with all of his political buttons in it, and she peers in there and goes, well, Mr. President, I don't see any Hutchinson buttons in there.
Oh, nice.
You love a mom.
Yeah, you got to love a mom's doing that. Because, I mean, look, he used to sort of handpick opponents for you, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. Whenever I ran for governor, of course, he was out campaigning for my Democrat opponent. And it was after that I said, now that I won, this race. I called him up, had a good visit with him, and we've done some things constructively together. But whenever I was in law school, he was a professor. Now, I didn't have him for a class, but he was a professor.
I can't even imagine
at
what
the
it'd be like.
University of Arkansas Law School at the time he ran for Congress against John Paul Hammersmith. So that was years ago, but Arkansas is a small state.
Yeah, right.
We all know each other, and so be warned.
Yeah, you got to watch your tongue around there, right? Politics has changed, though. I mean, look, let's get into the presidential for a minute. This is obviously why you're here. You've been traveling everywhere. I think from all accounts, not only are you a thoughtful guy, a good governor, you've got a good political radar. You obviously are aware of where the primary electorate is at this point, right? The sort of good guy, thoughtful, can get along with somebody like Bill Clinton is not exactly the top of mind for most primary voters. Yet, finishing your term as governor, you decide this is what you want to do. You want to get into this. Why?
Well, what compels me is the wrong policies of Joe Biden, taking our country in the wrong direction from energy policy, spending too much at the federal level, weak in terms of his leadership for America abroad, weak border security. So it's all about wrong policies for President Biden, but it's also reflective of a need for a course correction within the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. I do believe in that being a public servant is a defining moment for someone's life that you say, I want to give back to a country. And so much in our politics today is about divisiveness. It's about self-serving interest. And that's not my view of the public arena. So that's what motivates me to run. And your assessment is not wrong. And you're right. I am aware, the base is different than it was 20 years ago. Whenever I built the Republican Party, I was considered an arch conservative in Arkansas, and my politics has not changed. But today, the thoughtfulness, and the answers that you give that to very complex questions, sometimes they want to just hear things like build a wall, or they want to hear things like lock her up. I mean, these are things that are catchy, but that's not me. I believe in things that make a difference, and that's what governors do. You're held accountable, and you got to accomplish things, and you're not relying upon the one-liners that stir everybody's emotions.
What's your assessment on how we got here as a primary electorate? You mentioned you were an arch-conservative, thought of both in the House and as governor, and now people are like, oh, that's centrist Asa Hutchinson. What happened over the last 20 years that have brought us sort of to the place that we're at from a primary electorate standpoint?
The answer is Donald Trump. You just look at his campaign and the dramatic change that it took place and caused to take place in the Republican Party. That is where we switched from a populist party based upon Republican principles to fighting for purism, ideologically, and that if you don't agree with me 100% of the time, you're the enemy. And so, I do hearken back to the words of Ronald Reagan that if you agree with me 80% of the time, you're an ally, you're not an enemy. And that's one of the things I wanted to tell Turning Point yesterday, that we've got to respect the diversity of thought even within the Republican Party. I remember a Republican Party where Kay Bailey Hutchison was United States Senator from Texas. She was pro-choice, but she found a home in the Republican Party, and we recognized that was not exactly what I believe, but we respect differences, and now we have, and pro-life is something I fight hard for every day. But in the diversity of issues out there, we've become more narrow and more exclusive, and that's not how you win in general elections. You got to get those independent voters in, and to do that, it's not sloganism, but it's actually listening and understanding the needs of that suburban voter, the independent voter, and that we've got to be open to answering their challenges in life that they're most concerned about versus what happened in 2020 or the latest grievance.
So you did the Tucker interview at the forum, the Blaze Forum in Iowa last weekend, and then you did the Turning Point USA conference.
Look, I'll give you credit for going into the belly of the beast
Right.
with your message, going into places you know are going to disagree with you.
And that's important. I'll go on The View. I go to an audience, and as long as they give me a chance to defend my position, I want that audience. That's how you win votes and minds. And also, I go to Trump audiences. I love going down to the Georgia State Republican Convention where Trump spoke, I spoke, but of course Governor Kemp and others wouldn't even go there because the audience was so in for Trump. So I spoke, and at the end of it, this guy came up with a Trump hat on, and he says, "You didn't completely persuade me, but I do like you now."
Okay, so that's why you do it. Because my real question was like, gosh, you got to have a thick skin to do that. Because, at the Turning Point thing, people are booing you, even though you sound pretty reasonable and obviously a nice guy, right? But like, this moment we're in is so divisive. How do you handle the criticism, whether it's, combative interview with Tucker or people at a convention who aren't liking what you're saying? Like, how do you deal with that, as a candidate and a person?
Well, you have to have a thick skin, of course, but you focus on changing hearts and minds. And just like Turning Point yesterday, yes, there were boos out there, but you know what was frustrating to me, but also exciting, is that those boos were not coming from the college-age kids that were there.
Yeah.
They were well-behaved.
We noticed.
It was the general admission folks, the adults that were in there were setting a bad example. And so give those college kids credit. And I love taking pictures with them afterwards. But that's where you influence the minds of the future. So you take it, you absorb it. You worry about your family and how they respond because they love their dad. I've got 4 children. They're grown and 7 grandchildren. And
it's probably not their favorite thing in the world to watch you get booed on stage, right?
I'm sure it's painful for them. And that's what bothers you. I can handle it, but that is concerning. And we lose our humanity sometimes because of the anonymity of internet, Twitter and all the social media accounts. You could just say what you want to say, and you feel like you got free shot, forgetting that, hey, there's real people out there.
Yeah.
But that's good. It's politics, free speech.
It sounds like an awful lot of your message, if you're distilling this down, is that you have some concern about whether the Republican Party, as it's reflected in a primary electorate, can compete nationally in a general electorate. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why we've got to change how we compete and who we nominate. 2020, we didn't nominate all the right candidates. They were looking back. They were fighting each other. They were, handpicked by Donald Trump and endorsed by him, and the voters rejected them. And so, and they couldn't win in a general election is the point. And so we've got to have candidates that meet needs, that can give confidence and can broaden our base versus narrow our base. And that's fundamental to the Republican Party. I make the case that, we have to be a party that can actually compete on the East and West Coast. I mean, I'm from Middle America. I'm from Arkansas. I love our values. I love the Mid-American values in Iowa. But we've also got to be able to win votes nationally. We are a national party. We're not a middle of the country party, and we've got to be able to broaden that message, particularly in the general election.
So, in your assessment, if we just redo this thing again, Donald Trump is the nominee, we're going to come up short.
Yep, no doubt.
No doubt about
it. And I think there's a growing awareness out there, and that's why I'll go to any audience because when they realize that Trump can't carry the day to win in 2024, they're going to be looking for another candidate. And I want them to know my heart. I want them to know my love of this country and also vision for where we need to go. And so that's why we got to be out there. And, Donald Trump, I was chairman of his campaign in the 2020 cycle in Arkansas. So, I mean, I've supported him, but obviously he's changed. The needs of our party have changed. We can't lose again. And that's where we'd be headed if he's the nominee.
So much of this, it seems to me, and you mentioned the ideological component, which we can get to in a second, but so much of this, it seems to me, is tone, right? And you hear primary voters, they want to assure that candidates that they are voting for are as angry as they are about the direction of the country. Again, you said that's not your style. Your style is to try to persuade as many people to your point of view. And oftentimes, at least observing the way that your candidacy has been rolled out here over the last couple months, is it also attributes different rationale for policy decisions that you make. You had a big back and forth with Tucker Carlson on what the left calls gender-affirming care, and your work a veto of a bill that would have banned all of that for minors. But then you look at your record, and you're also, I think, the second governor in America who signed a ban on transgender sports, right? So there's nuance there that is sort of lost.
Well, it is, and I hope people see that I'm an independent thinker. I looked at that transgender bill. If it would have been prohibiting transgender surgery, I would have signed it in a minute, but it was too long, interfere with parental rights, and it was held unconstitutional. So, the courts, I think, gave her actually a good reason that law was bad. Now, there's been better laws that have been drafted, and there's a lot of nuances there. But yes, you look at my record, it's very a consistent conservative. We've lowered taxes. We have created $2 billion surplus, created 100,000 jobs while I was governor in Arkansas. I pushed back on the Biden administration, the Obama administration, their leftist policies. And we had a very pro-freedom way to handle the pandemic. But what you said is right. It's about tone. Whenever, I talk about a general election and winning voters, I mean, I have a conservative record, but the tone is important, that you listen. And if I can just tell you one example as to how I governed. After the George Floyd murder and the protest across the country, many of which turned violent, Little Rock was no exception. And I was watching on TV just like everybody else, and we had violent protesters that burned buildings, threatened the Capitol, hurt people, and the local police was not doing enough. I said, enough is enough. And so I brought in the National Guard, the state police, set up a unified command structure. That night we arrested 70 people, and guess what? The violence stopped.
It stopped.
It stopped.
Yeah.
But the second point of it is I brought in the young African-American protest leaders into my office. And I said, tell me what you're thinking. And they told me their concerns. And I said, well, do you want to get something done? You're concerned about police action. And so would you serve on a task force? I put them on a task force with law enforcement officers. They made recommendations, and the legislature adopted it that improved the pay of law enforcement, improved training, created a database for those that use excessive force. Something got done. That's my leadership style, is conservative, enforce the law, but let's listen, let's figure out how we can decrease the divide in our country.
What do you say to all those on the right that see what the left is doing across this country, whether it is Soros prosecutors or, you mentioned the riots and how you handled that is admirable. But there are so many people who believe that they're just not dealing in good faith at all. These are people who actually just see America as a force for bad rather than a force for good. And just simply talking about these things over time reduces conservatives to basically not making any inroads into trying to protect the values of our country. We're just constantly giving them away to the left. I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that is the case on a range of issues. But how does just sort of dealing with the left get us to where we need to be rather than just fighting back?
Well, we should fight back. And if you look at my history, I've been involved in the fight for our culture for decades. I mean, I was part of the moral majority.
Yeah, right.
I was fighting the battle in Arkansas for pro-life and for parents back in the 80s, and so it is
So
important.
there's no lack of conviction to fight it. It's just how you get to a solution that you're
Exactly. And so the first level in which you impact the culture and protect the culture that you believe in is through your faith, your individual life, your community, your local school board. That's how conservatives believe we impact our future and hold our culture in a way that is consistent with our values. Now, the left then wants to use the power of government, though, to enforce theirs. And we got to oppose that in every direction, in every way. But I don't think we should be forced to say, all right, we're going to fight back by using the power of government to tell businesses what to do or to tell parents what to do. We have to at least debate when we use that power of government. To me, that is the conservative position. So as president, you're going to see me reverse Biden's policies that has pushed us left. That was flat wrong by the Biden administration. And we're going to become neutral again. We're not going to reverse that and say, all of a sudden we're going to be passing federal laws that's going to tell a local school board what your culture ought to be. That's going to be determined in your community.
No, I mean, look, it makes a lot of sense. So you would subscribe. I mean, it sounds like you're basically describing traditional Reagan conservatism, three-legged stool, right? A strong national defense, social conservatism, fiscal conservatism, across the board.
We need them all. They're a part of our conservative base, and the social conservatives is critically important, as well as the economic conservatives and our defense conservatives. And we fight amongst ourselves. Right now, there's a big debate about Ukraine.
Right.
I've never seen such division in a Republican Party on that point.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
Well, I make of it that Donald Trump has got a big megaphone, and that's influenced people's thinkings, as well as Tucker Carlson and others that have denigrated any support for Ukraine and pulled us back into an isolationist view of the world. And that's not Ronald Reagan. That's not peace through strength. And I fundamentally believe that we want peace in this world. And if you want to avoid war, let's be strong and show our strength. And and that's important in Ukraine. Not our personnel, but our dollars that can support their freedom. They have their freedom violated, and they have their sovereignty violated. When is the United States of America is not standing with the oppressed against the oppressor? That's the America that I know. That's our national character.
I think what the Tucker Carlsons of the world would say, none of this would really surprise you, but they would say, they set up this as sort of a choice, right? Like, okay, but we can give billions to Ukraine, but our southern border is open, right? Or our cities are crumbling here at home, but we're giving billions to Ukraine. How do you answer to that?
Well, it is the false choice, obviously, but I answer it that, you know what our last spending bill was from Congress that we're spending domestically? $1.2 trillion. $1.2 trillion. The complaint is we're spending too much domestically. Now, obviously, we want to reallocate that to our southern border and meet some security needs that we have. But in contrast to $1.2 trillion, we're spending less than $100 billion on military aid to Ukraine. The contrasts are not there.
Right.
And so it is in our national interest. That's where Tucker and I agree. We should not engage overseas unless our national security interests are at stake. And that's
But you believe they fundamentally are here.
Absolutely. They fundamentally are. If you want to keep our men and women out of conflict, well, let's help Ukraine win their battle there in protecting their freedom and their sovereignty. Otherwise, it's going to be, we're going to have Article 5 of NATO triggered that's going to compel our men and women to engage in Europe again. We don't want to do that. And, there's limits, absolutely. I mean, nobody gets a blank check. But whenever we have sacrificed, and my dad in World War II, now he was in a different theater, but the greatest generation had a conflict in Europe, and we won that, and we rebuilt Europe, and we don't want to lose that freedom of our Western allies because it's part and parcel to the strength, to the future of the United States and our own freedoms.
So fast forwarding just a little bit, January 2025, you're sworn in as President of the United States. What is the first thing that you tackle? Is it the border? Is it something related to the economy? What's the first thing on your plate as you see it?
Well, first of all, you got to reverse a lot of what Joseph Biden has done through his executive order. So you're going to sign an executive order to reverse his executive orders.
Mm-hmm.
But
you're going to have a big stack of them too, I'm afraid.
Exactly. But then secondly, it is the border security because that builds confidence. And, right now Biden has given a directive that you can't build any more of the wall. And so you've got millions of dollars of material that's sitting there, steel, unused along the fence. Well, you got to reverse that. You got to get that infrastructure built again. I'd submit to Congress a border security bill that would help us fund our security. But there's some really good ideas out there as well, because I believe in immigration. And how about a state-based visa program? Right now, talk about the principles of federalism. Right now, we have employer-based visas. The federal government has allocated some visa authority to employers to be engaged in that. What if we had a state-based visa program in which a state could say, I want to sign up, we have needs for some workers here, and they can sponsor and they can have the security measures in place. And so that's a way to encourage the right level of lawful immigration with controls on it and honoring our principles of federalism at the same time. So those are some ideas that, I'd be looking at in January of next year. But it's all about the economy. The economy is the number one issue for 2024, and that's the first thing that I would address as president. And the most important thing is I would sign an executive order. I would send the signal as loud as I could. We're going to have a pro-growth energy policy. Mm-hmm. We're going to produce energy again. We're not going to be dependent, and it's going to be so strong that our producers are willing to invest again in our own production.
No, I think, look, well said. There's an issue out there that sort of fuses all of this: national security, economy, energy. It's the issue of China. Curious about your thoughts on what a Hutchinson administration would do to address our relationship there.
Well, I've been to China 5 times. I understand I understand what communism means to them. And whenever I'm in a meeting negotiating with another company, a Chinese company, and they call a break and they say, we got to call Beijing. In other words, they could not even negotiate a deal without the central party approving that. Mm. And so China, we're going to win economically because oppression never wins over freedom, because we have a rule of law, then they have a weak rule of law in that country. And so they're always going to be stymied in that. We have got to move our manufacturing back to the United States in terms of our sensitive industries, our pharmaceuticals, our military parts. Those have to be brought back here. We're not going to break off the economy, as some candidates say. We ought to just, freeze it and do away with our trading relationships with them. No one would follow that leadership. Mm-hmm. So we've got to compete economically with them. We've got to move some of the supply chain back. And then thirdly, we've got to make sure they understand our military strength and our commitment to the freedom of Taiwan. And that starts with having our right resources in the Philippine bases that's close in that area.
Now, look, you've thought about it. That's more than most.
That's what I do.
All right, so let's just talk brass tacks of the campaign here. Are you going to be on that debate stage in August?
It all depends on whether I won votes by this podcast right here.
Yeah, this is it. Huh? It's on us.
It's on you. I'm either sinking or swimming here. I've got to have 40,000 donors.
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds of new donors every day, which is pretty remarkable. But that bar is pretty high. Other candidates have made it. We're gonna get there. ASA2024.com.
There it is.
Dollar counts, and help us to get that debate stage. We've met the polling goals. I mean, the polling guidelines, we're in on that. So we just got to make sure we've got that number of donors.
So you've been critical of the RNC's debate threshold, qualifications. I'm curious why.
Well, because they're more stringent than we've ever had before, or either party's ever had before. It's intentionally designed to reduce the field more quickly, and that deprives Iowa and voters of the ability to see all the candidates. And so you've got to tighten it at some point.
Yeah.
But whenever you're looking at the first debate, let's have a broad field. And specifically, historically, if you set any criteria, there are alternatives. You either have 40,000 donors or 1% of the national polls. Well, they just combined it and said you got to have both.
Well, so I look at the Q2 numbers. A lot of people raised a lot of money and everything. But then you look at Biden. He raised $71 million, right? And I think Biden and Trump in 2020 both raised and spent $1 billion.
Yeah,
$1 billion. And I mean, a lot of that was raised online, right? And so, I guess, you've been in this business for a very long time. How do you adapt to an environment where you have to find a way to raise money
table
online?
stakes.
And that's sort of table stakes of politics today, because if you can't, then you really can't compete nationally. So how do you sort of adjust to that?
You do it.
Yeah.
That's the criteria. You've got to match it. And so, you have to spend money to get to a $40,000 donor base.
Right.
And so basically, the campaigns are saying that's the most important criteria and element to show your strength is to have 40,000 donors, which formula you got to spend about $1.2 million to do that.
But you're proving things like emails and text messages, things like that. It's obviously different than some previous campaigns you've probably run.
Sure, you can't rely upon just simply large donors to fund it. You've got to generate the digital advertising. You've got to go for the small dollar donors, and usually that takes a lot of investment of money. So we're doing the digital advertising. We're increasing that. We're not self-funded, so I don't have $10 million to soak into
you can't send out gift cards.
That all costs money.
No, I get it. Listen, we have 3 questions that we ask everybody on this program for the first time. The first one is, if you could plan your last meal on Earth, what would it be?
Man, you get me hungry just talking about that. So it would be venison meatloaf.
Oh,
wow.
It would be fried okra and potatoes.
Yeah, that's some Southern order right there.
It would be corn on the cob and coleslaw with a sweet twist to it. That's my last meal.
I love that. And I imagine, based upon you brought us some bourbon here today, I imagine we probably throw one of those in too, huh?
Well, if it's my last one, I need a double shot.
I love it. All right. So if you never got into this line of work at all, no public service, blue sky with the benefit of retrospect, you can do anything in your life you now looking back, would have interest in doing, what would it be?
Exactly what I did whenever I was in the public arena, which is a lawyer. Yeah. So I'm a lawyer. I've tried, I love the criminal justice system. I've prosecuted cases.
You were a U.S. attorney at one point.
I was a United States attorney, but I've been into scores and scores and scores of jury trials, espionage cases.
Did you ever pull the "I'm just a country lawyer" bit?
Oh, every day. Yeah. Of course, they could look at me and figure it out. I didn't have to exactly say that. I was actually accused of that during the impeachment trial as well. But I love trying cases, so that's what I would do if I wasn't in the public arena.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Can I just throw in one more question here before you get to the last one? This is a question that's become popular on the show, and a lot of people have answered it in a variety of ways. But thinking about the biggest animal that you could take mano a mano. I don't know if that's something that's crossed your mind recently.
Well, the animals are attacking us everywhere, so it's on everybody's top of mind.
They are. So, Governor, I just got to ask you, thinking through, what would you say is the biggest animal you could take man on man?
An elk.
Okay.
Oh, wow, really? Yeah.
That is a big
of course,
animal.
Oh, you said that's without a weapon.
Yeah. Without a
weapon.
Let me pull
Either
that
way,
back.
either
That
way.
would I would.
That would be a tough deal.
Yeah.
You can't catch a hoof from an elk. You got a real problem.
Yeah. Well, I would say a coyote.
Okay.
A coyote, I'd take mono el mono, and I'd probably lose.
Just depends if you landed that first shot or not, right? All right, so the last question that we ask everybody, a little esoteric, but we feel like almost every successful person is motivated by one of two things, the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat. It's not that anyone enjoys losing or people don't enjoy winning. It's what motivates you to get to the next goal, right? And you can think of it like a Michael Jordan character as an ultimate agony of defeat. And glass half full, sunny optimist charging up the hill is sort of your thrill of victory component. Governor, where do you find yourself here?
Without any doubt, thrill of victory.
Yeah.
And obviously, because part of the thrill of victory is, hey, I actually get to do something now to accomplish what you've been preaching or advocating for. So thrill of victory is always inspiring me, and there's nothing more empowering than being elected by the people you represent. Some people think that's narrowing, it's constrictive, you have to worry about it every day. It's empowering, and having that confidence in what you can do as governor or as president.
Well, thank you for joining us. Where can people follow along? You gave your website once. You can go ahead and give it another plug.
Well, thank you. It's asa2024.com. Follow us. Whether we're Iowa, South Carolina, you can see that. You can contribute to us. But follow our campaign. We need your help.
Governor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
This episode is fueled by the American Petroleum Institute. No matter your politics, no matter the debate, one thing is certain. America runs on affordable, reliable energy. America's policies must recognize that Americans benefit from making, moving, and improving the energy right here in America. Today, America's oil and natural gas industry supports nearly 11 million jobs and provides American energy to keep this nation strong. Learn how at api.org.